You're watching The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the God. We are The Breakfast Club. We got a special guest in the building.
My guy.
Tony Lewis Jr.
What's up, man?
Long time coming, Tony. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm well, man. Real happy to be here, man.
Explain to the people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm an author, an activist, advocate for men, women, and children impacted by mass incarceration from Washington, D.C. I got about an 18-year career really touching people, helping men and women when they return from incarceration, trying to get support for children with incarcerated parents. That's important to me because my father went to prison when I was 9. You know what I mean? So and his sentence was life without parole. Father, one of the biggest drug dealers in D.C. history. And I often thought, like, what if we had more support? And when I say we, I mean me and my mother. My mother really lost her mind when my father went to prison. Literally, right? And started to battle like severe mental illness. So, and that incarceration of my father caused me to pretty much lose both of my parents. And not to mention the backdrop, I'm growing up in D.C. This was 89, so I'm growing up in D.C. in the 90s. Thank God I had a strong grandmother. And I come from like, I don't like use this term, but the world would call my family a crime family, particularly on my mother's side. So my uncles, they were in the street as well, but they were able to help provide a certain level of stability. And I made it through something that most of my peers did not, And so, long story short, I became an outreach worker initially, working with at-risk youth, trying to, mediate disputes and beefs in the street. And that morphed into me getting into reentry and being a pillar in the reentry community. And then an advocate, locally and nationally around issues impacting children with incarcerated parents. And that's why I wrote the book Slug as well, to be able to show this comprehensive view of mass incarceration, that it's not just the person that's incarcerated, it's the family, and then hence it's the community. And mass incarceration destabilized families and communities to the point where you see the spill out of that, the collateral damage. And I wanted Slug to really highlight that through just telling my story and my life, to inspire and empower those going through it, but to also educate, right, and inform those who don't come from communities like the one I come from.
Did your environment and the people you grew up around influence you to go to a life of crime, or to do the exact opposite? Nah,
you know what? It kind of was a mixture of both. Interestingly enough, because I'm gonna tell you what I mean. So, people teach what they know, right? So the people around me, I grew up around whatever it was in the street, everything, gambling, drug dealing, bank robbery, whatever. But at the same time, they still encouraged me because I was smart. I was unapologetically smart. Go ahead, Slug, keep doing your thing. Go to school. I went to Catholic school. They pushed me. They would ask me questions in the hood, just random stuff. They knew I knew that nobody else did, you know what I mean, and celebrated my intelligence. So it was kind of a duality there. Right. They wanted to prepare me if I went into the street, but they encouraged me to do something different.
What about your father?
Yeah, he was one of my biggest fan, my biggest advocate to never follow in his footsteps. You know what I mean? And like my dad, when they first went in, they was at our local D.C. jail.
They called him the $300 million man.
Yeah, well, Rafe was his partner.
was.
Okay.
So, but yeah, he was also the head of the conspiracy. So I mean, I guess that same moniker was, but Rafe was the more popular one.
Right.
I've heard him in like rap records.
Yeah. Jay-Z, Can I Live, and several other records or whatever. And so they they got taken from D.C. jail to Quantico Marine Base, right? And we had and I'm mentioning that because that was like, I don't even know anybody else in America that drug dealers that went to, or mob or whoever went to a Marine base, right? They got flown into by helicopter to court every day. But you had to go visit them. You had to visit at the cell. It wasn't a visiting hall because it's not a prison. And then from there, my father was shipped to Long Park, California for the next 14 years. So, we couldn't visit real often. And so his biggest fear was that I was going to obviously go into the street. And so he was always in my ear about watching who I be around, watch the things I do. But I'm on Hanover. We grew up on the same block, the same block my parents grew up on, I grew up on. I live there now. But so it was almost impossible to avoid those things. But I never felt like it was okay with him, to answer your question. So by the grace of God, man, in the book highlights so many close calls. And I think what people miss is that in our community, right, The choices are bad and worse. It's not good and bad, right? You in a situation where every day these things are presented to you. It's not. I've seen guys who were less aggressive than I, right? Guys who when we were 12 and 13, they wouldn't even fight, and by the time we 16, they murderers, right? And so that's not just about choices. That's America has to look at that. How does that happen? You know what I mean?
Question. How do you feel about a lot of people glorifying a lot of the stuff that your pops went through, and I'm sure that you've seen, and especially a lot of people who haven't been there or lived through it?
Yeah, I ain't with it. Even in music, I ain't with it. I'm not saying don't talk about it, but you got to tell the other story, right? You got to tell the other side.
That's why Jay-Z. That's what Jay-Z's always been so good at.
Yeah, absolutely. The fullness, but that's why you know he went through it. Because you can't, if you really went through certain things, you can't talk about one without talking about the other, right? So just like in my book, I talk about my father having 560 Benzes and 928 Porsches, us being ringside at Ray Leonard and Tyson fights, him trying on 80 pair of Versace pants and all this stuff, right? But I also talk about my mother losing her mind. I'm talking about him crying when he got life. I'm talking about the pain we went through trying to maintain a relationship. So you get that balance.
You know what I always wanted to know? How come, and I guess maybe you're the perfect person, it seems like when people get into this life, the addiction is they can't stop because they make enough for a lifetime, but it's just like they can't stop.
You know what's crazy too, right? Sometimes too, if you don't have, like with my dad in them generation specifically,
like they said,
right?
300
they
million.
was
Just
first.
imagine 300 million in the 80s.
Yeah, I know, but you first. Well, it was a guy from around our way before my dad named Cornell Jones, right? And BT did American Gangster on Cornell and Rayful, right? And I was on both of them. Because my dad was like the link between those two. My street was like the first street that ushered cocaine into DC, right? And so Cornell had taken steps to legitimize in some ways. My dad kind of had that model, and he had started to try to do that as well, whether it was real estate or stores. But to your point, you young men, when you making all this money, and then what happens too, people don't talk about, you start getting these other people depending on you. You become. We talking about abject poverty,
You're like
bro.
the boss, and you have a bunch of
There
employers
you go.
that work for you.
So it becomes more for them than it even is for you.
Yeah, you can't even cash out.
You
But at the end
can't.
of the day, you get locked up though, because everybody else takes a deal.
There you go.
You see what I'm saying?
There you go.
And snitches on you.
And with that piece too, when you talk about around that time is when these conspiracy laws first came into existence as well. I mentioned Cornell. Cornell went to jail, got caught with like $2-3 million, gold bars, all this crazy stuff. Trying to buy like 95 bricks. They got caught doing that and got 9 to 27 years. That was in 1985. Come 89, you got mandatory minimum sentencing, right? So my father and them got caught with much less than in terms of physical evidence, but they got life without parole. And that when you start hearing stuff about sentencing policies and stuff like that, that changed the game as well, right? Because now people was going to jail for much longer stretches. And really, with my father's situation, he got a death sentence basically. And 29 years later, he's still incarcerated. We still dealing with that. And so now it used to be about me going to see him. Now I got 2 babies that I gotta take into these prisons, which is probably the hardest thing. So that generational trauma is being passed down to my little girls, man.
It's interesting you say in the hood there's only 2 choices, bad or worse. Like, how do you tell kids that but then present them an option?
Yeah.
Where's the option to do good? Like,
Sure. Well, what I meant by that, right? Because I feel like I'm an example to them but it's about the options that you can see is what I really for clarity. There are good options, but it's the options that you can see.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so they got to see people that's from right where they from that did something different, that couldn't dribble, that couldn't rap, that just did it, right? And again, Slug is instructional to them in that way. I wanted it to be like a blueprint, a GPS. And because a lot of times people even told me to look up to coming up. Like, I ain't looking up to you. I like you. Like, it's cool. I respect what you do. But you ain't from where I'm from. I would write everybody off that way. You don't inspire me because I know I can't be. At least that's how I felt. When I was growing up, and then DC was interesting, right? Because, in the 80s and the 90s, we didn't even have rap music. Didn't even really mean anything to us. We had go-go music.
Right.
If you were trying to rap, you were trying to be from New York, and that wasn't really what you was trying to be in D.C. Probably the only place in the country that being from New York wasn't a cool thing. But that's just how we felt based on some stuff that was going on in the streets at that time. And that's what you was pushed on you. Like, you don't want to be like, you don't rap, we don't do that. So you went into the street. That's what you did in D.C. And everybody think about this too. I tell people this all the time. So we got suburbs, and we've morphed into like this whole DMV thing. When we were coming up, it was just D.C. The people from the suburbs, they made it. And there's a lot of people that you meet that's from D.C. or from our area. But when you say, are you really from like D.C.? But like, no, because when you came from D.C., you died, you went to prison, you picked up a habit. And it's unfortunate. I don't want to speak in generalizations, but that is true. And that's, again, I feel like that's the flag that I fly to inspire. Like when the people coming home from the feds, right? You know, we don't have no local jail. So you break the law in D.C., everybody goes to the federal system, which is a whole nother thing in terms of family reunification and disconnection, because we don't have a local prison.
I never knew that.
Yeah, man. Every charge you get, 1997, Bill Clinton signed the Revitalization Act of D.C. D.C. was in a lot of financial trouble. And so they took over our corrections. So if you break a local law or federal law, you go to the feds.
That don't even seem fair.
It's not fair. It's ridiculous. And we have almost, 100%, everybody locked up from D.C. black. You know what I'm saying? We don't, up until 10 years ago, we didn't have anybody else really, and now but mass incarceration has created this incredible gentrification process, right?
I was going to ask you about the effect of gentrification now in D.C. because it's so difficult. I hear people talk about it all the time.
It's and I know it's happening everywhere, right? I go around the country, but it's nothing. It's nothing like what's happening in Washington. But this, what we grew up in, it has a direct parallel to that. Also homelessness, right? Our homelessness rate rivals what was happening in the heart of the crack era. But that's because the black family in D.C. was so destabilized by addiction, premature death, and mass incarceration. So as somebody who, I went to college, I went to our local university, UDC, but I never left my street. Right. So people have been a part of my entire process. They've seen that. That's why I was 25 teaching 50-year-old men, and they would listen to me. You feel me? They come home doing 30 years. They know my dad and my uncles. Someone watched me grow up or whatever. But they could hear me differently because they know what I've been through. And so with the book, I wanted to package that up and put it in schools and juvenile detention centers and in prisons to say, bro, listen, it's hard, it's difficult, but it's not impossible.
Right.
And you got to have some accountability on you, and you can do something different.
Because we certainly don't all start off with the same circumstances.
True.
And so sometimes people can say, well, this person can do it. We all make choices, and you just have to make the right choices. But it's a lot more difficult for some people depending on what their circumstances are before they have to make those choices.
Yes, and we can do that without making excuses, though.
Word.
You feel me?
100%.
We can acknowledge that,
Yep.
but that's been part of my strategy. Okay, let's acknowledge the pain. Now let's move past it.
100%.
You feel me? So that's the thing. People think, well, if you say that, you're giving people an out. You telling them that they don't have to be accountable. That's not true. And I feel like through love comes accountability, and we don't do enough of that, particularly in our in the way that we deal with the prison system, in the way that we deal with reentry. I was thinking about this current administration, and I know a lot of people know that the president was talking about, the death sentence for drug dealers.
Crazy.
Which is incredibly frightening to me. But then I think about, my dad's situation. And like he feels like he got a death sentence, a slow one.
I had a life sentence.
You know what I'm saying? I had an uncle who had a life. He was in 11 years on a life sentence and killed himself on January 1st, 2012. You know what I mean? Because of that. Like he felt that way. He wasn't coming home anyway. But I say that to say this. I feel like if this criminal justice conversation, I really feel like this administration can do more than any other administration. With a Republican majority, I feel like you can get a real criminal justice bill if the political will is there.
They don't want to, though.
They don't want to. I think even from a business standpoint, right? Because I think we start talking about hiring. That's my expertise, getting men and women employed when they come home. People that are in tune with the business community, to galvanize them, to change hiring policies, bringing back federal parole. All these things that I feel like would be possible, but to your point, like, is the will there? You know what I mean?
Yeah, they don't want to. That's the prison education.
Sure.
Like they should have been, they took that out, 1994?
94, they removed the Pell Grants and all that. And then, you think about this too, I don't know, when you go to these, in the book I got a line that speaks to steel and coal country becoming prison country, right? And so, in Appalachia region and things like that, when the steel mills closed and the coal mines closed, they replaced them with prisons. It's federal prisons all over West Virginia, Western Pennsylvania, Maryland, Kentucky. So to the base of a lot of the Trump base or what have you, Those are jobs. When I visit these prisons for my job and for personal, going to see my family and friends. When you go in these towns, bro, you be like, oh, damn, I see why, because there's nothing there but the prison.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to go to your little, I got to go to your gas station. I got to go to your diner. If my daughter got the wrong thing on or my wife ain't got her right to wide bra, we got to go to your Walmart and buy that. Like, it's just an economy for these regions.
And that's why them people don't care about criminal justice reform. For what? I got a private prison. It's my investment.
That's my point, bro. Yes.
What did you think of Hillary Clinton when she was running? Because, I mean, I'm sure Bill has done a lot of stuff that's really hurt your dad, and then Hillary was running, but then you had Hillary on one side, and then you had Trump on the other side. Sure.
I mean, I don't really see a big difference in these parties sometimes as it relates to us, and particularly as it relates to criminal justice issues. I did feel hopeful that had she won, she would feel like she could, yes, she had to fix it. She had to right some wrongs.
That's one of the things she said when she came on the Breakfast Club. Of course, everybody got caught up in the hot sauce thing, but she said that.
Yes.
She knew that it was wrong.
But before '94, before that big crime bill that built prisons and took Pell Grants out, you had in '87 with the mandatory minimums, right? Which really has had a long lasting impact. And in the Sentencing Commission has, first it was the 100-to-1 disparity with crack. They moved that to 18-to-1. And then the 2-point reduction, which is drug -2. Anybody sentenced under the mandatory minimums for drugs, because you get a point system. They gave people a 2-point reduction if you was eligible for it. And like my man, like Pusha T helped me a lot to galvanize and get people to write in about that. And that actually got passed. And I know a lot of dudes who came home from that. My father got denied for it, but, a lot of other guys, on average, it was like an 18-month reduction.
And actually writing in helped to get that to
Absolutely.
See, so people sometimes think that it doesn't matter and your word doesn't matter, but it does matter.
Yes, and we have to be informed. And that's why I think, particularly from, a hip-hop standpoint with this issue specifically, like, this ain't political. We from the street, supposedly, right? Everybody, all these rappers, you from the street, you got to speak on this. This is for our people. And if we can change policy around sentencing, you helping the men and women. And that's another thing I want to stress, the men and women, right? The fastest growing population in prison are black women. And so children aren't just losing their fathers to incarceration, they losing their mothers, which changing the complexity it is for real when mommy go to jail.
Yeah.
But these guys have to speak more on these issues, man. It's imperative. I'm happy to see, not happy that Meek went through that, but I'm happy that his situation is getting the light and the attention. They have to be vocal. And they also have to fund community-based organizations that's on the ground dealing with these people. If we can't stop people from going to jail and simultaneously stop the people that have been to prison from returning, we will never do anything about mass incarceration.
Well, part of the problem too is, and I was thinking about this last night talking to my wife, it's like we always talk about we need people in our community to be in the judicial system. But it seems like when we have those people, they're scared as shit. We was talking to Mike Brown's mom, and she was like,
Leslie
the
McSpadden.
judges that were supposed to be on the case were black, but they decided not to do it.
Yeah.
So now it was a white judge that doesn't understand. And the same thing with Meek Mill. We have an African-American judge that we would think would understand that he's been through and see that he is doing better. But instead, she stuck him, it seems like, worse. So
They don't like she didn't like him.
But let me ask you this, Envy. Do we assume that just because you black, you understand what it means to come from a community like Meek comes from, right? I think that's one thing we got to kind of think about.
Your skin folk, not your kin folk.
Yeah,
that's
not.
my sister Angela Ross says.
Even back in the day, right? Back in the day, you had the black bourgeoisie. But I think over the years, that gap between the poor African-American and the affluent African-American has grown. So, and then when those people get into those positions, it's pressure on them to not be partial. White person can be partial to another white person all day.
Yeah, they do.
But it's an added sense of like, I gotta be strong, because if I'm not strong, I'm not hard on this black guy, then they're gonna look at me like I'm being partial. Right. And that's the disadvantage. And I think, one of the biggest things I see in my work and around in a lot of different industries is that it's not enough of us getting there. You feel me? It's particularly enough of us from certain communities. In 40 and under from the urban community, man, in a lot of ways, you ain't making it, just period. You're just not making it. You're not making it. That if the people that will understand it the most, they're not making it. So even people speak up around this. I love everybody. I'm not even that guy. But I hear people talking about issues that I be like, yo, do you really? I like that you talking about that, but you leaving a whole lot out because that's not your experience, honestly. And we got to value people enough to at least consult before you come on these platforms or wherever you go and talk about the issues going on in the hood. If you ain't from the hood, if you don't work in the hood, how you talking about it? You can't just read this stuff, man. You know what I mean? It's very nuanced. It's extremely layered. And it's people's lives that we're talking about. So even these criminal justice organizations, how many of them are led by justice-involved people? And when I say justice-involved people, I mean people that have been formerly incarcerated.
Right.
I ain't talking about you got one that worked there so you can say, hey, Charlamagne worked with me. No, Charlamagne should be the, not, you know what I'm saying, but you have been justice involved, though, right? So Charlamagne should be the face of it, the voice. The dude Shaka Singo, I just saw that he got appointed at the head of the good man. You know what I'm saying? I don't know him personally, but I just respect what he's done. Right. And then he just got appointed like the head of the
I saw
the anti-recidivism piece.
Righting My Wrongs.
Right.
That was his book.
Yeah, that's his book. Righting My Wrongs, absolutely.
But you talked about hip hop too, I feel like hip hop has caused a lot of people to go to jail as well. Just because I'm gonna tell you why. Because you have these people who, like you said, haven't been in the street, don't have these experiences, but they're glorifying it. They're rapping about it. They're making it look cool. So then these kids actually go take real penitentiary chances and get locked up. But
you know what? This is my thing though. The backdrop of that though is them, the sad reality that these guys have become the leaders. Not that they shouldn't be leaders, but these kids, these young people don't have anybody around them to bump that up against.
Absolutely.
To say you tripping or to say this is how you really do it. So I think those two things, when they go hand in hand, yes, right? And I think artists, rappers, they need to be more conscious of that. We got to hold them more accountable to like, bruh, okay, if that's your reality, talk about it. But then tell the realities, man. Like you mentioned, you got to tell the other part of it.
The Jay-Z, the Pusha T way.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
You have to.
But you know what too, which I never understood, and maybe it's not me, and I would never want anybody to get robbed or anything, but I never understood how somebody like me or looks like me or from the same environment from me would rather try to hurt me opposed to hurting somebody outside. And I never understood that. You know what I mean? Why would you want to take mine or try to hurt me opposed to somebody else? And I never understood that with our people.
But that's with every group of people. Because
the closer too. You know. But but I think we're challenged around that, right? We're pitted against each other. I mean, some would say that goes way back to even slavery, right? That we're taught to hate each other. And not see each other as brothers and sisters and allies, right? And so, but I think that's why it's important that as individuals, we live that out every day. I believe in the power of one, bro. Like, we can impact each other. There's a lot of things in my life, me never, when the FBI came and they ain't take me, or when them gunshots went off and I ain't get hit, I took that as like, it changed how I looked at life, and when I walk and people see me, people that ain't smiling all day, they smile. You know what I mean? Because I bring that kind of energy. At least I try to. You know what I mean? I try to work and help my people, and we got to just do that. And in DC, that's what I've been like, just trying to show people like what role each one of us play. You know what I mean? I think we push enough love out there, we kind of change things. I mean, it's a slow grind, but I believe in that. I've seen it happen. I've been in too many things, man. I've been covered. And so for young people out there, bro, it starts with you. It really does. But hurt people as well. That's the other piece of this. All this trauma in our community, man. Like, you growing up, going through so much, it's hard to love. Like, for people to even tell you they love you. When I mentor youngins and Shawty, I love you, I'm proud of you. Some young people don't even know how to respond back.
Because their heart is so cold.
There you go.
And if you telling me you love me, what you about to do?
That's no question.
Why you set me up for? Why you trying to make me comfortable?
Absolutely, bro. Like, you trying to victimize me. You know what I'm saying? And that's sad but they're not getting that. I had the blessing of going in the house and something in the refrigerator, even when things went bad for us. You know what I mean? But it never was as bad as those around me. Right. My mother was schizophrenic, and she might be out around talking to herself, but I knew she loved me. She wasn't tricking out in the alley. She wasn't bringing dudes in the house. You feel me? My friends didn't have that luxury. So when I talk about them 13-year-old meek, scared little boys turning to 16-year-old monsters, this is why. Right. They didn't wake up one morning like, I'm just gonna start selling all the coke in the world and I'm killing anything moving. Not to mention that them dudes down the street was shooting at us. So like, and the police didn't protect us in that way. We didn't feel like, you know what I mean? It's those kind of elements that I grew up in that can turn a young man, a pure soul, and make them feel like they gotta protect themselves and arm themselves.
What role do you think the legacy of slavery and segregation plays in today's makeup of the prison population?
Oh man, it absolutely. Well, slavery, segregation, lack of access to opportunities, it causes it, and then not to mention that, law enforcement and a lot of these things were set up to employ and to oppress, right? So you employ one group of people and you employ them to oppress another group of people. In the prison industry, it's an industry. It's an industry, literally. From the federal Unicor to these private prisons, and it deals with corporations. You basically getting free labor. A lot of people watch 13th or what have you. Yeah. So it plays a direct. And the other backdrop to that is now we talked about the destabilization of these families and these communities, and then you go in these schools and you got teachers in these schools. And I adore teachers, and I've been doing a lot of teacher training around Slug as well, because a lot of these teachers, people that are becoming teachers, have no connectivity to the communities they're teaching in. So now it becomes even harder for our children to get the education that they need. So there's a big correlation between the undereducated or underskilled and those incarcerated as well, right? So again, none of these issues are an island, right? They're all interconnected, and we got a lot of work to do. But the more people, because we talked about not people from the hood not becoming judges, how many people from the hood under 40 are becoming teachers, principals? And I'm not saying that there's not any, but I know in DC, when I look around, I've been going to every school with this literary program, and I'm not seeing people from Washington. So I'm speaking firsthand in our community with the people born native Washingtonians just not at the table.
No, I know when I was in elementary school, from kindergarten to 6th grade, I think I only had one black teacher that whole entire time. And so I never felt any connection to any of my teachers, right, or felt like they could really understand anything, because sometimes there's a lot of things going on at home with these kids. I remember I did do a teaching program, and there was one kid, he would wear the same outfit every single day because he didn't have any clothes at home. But, you have to pay special attention to other kids and making fun of him. Yeah. And it's important for teachers to pay attention to social things and to understand what could potentially be happening in kids' homes, because sometimes when they come to school, they may act out because of issues they're having at home. And if you're not understanding of that, then you can't deal with it properly.
Yes, my co-author, Kevin Reeves, he has a term. He says people struggle in silence. And when teachers have often told me, like, when I come in and do my piece with the book, like, bro, I've never seen them be that quiet and attentive for a whole period. And then when I leave, the teachers write back and talk to us about how the young people then in turn say, man, I'm going through this, I'm going through that, I'm going through that. But they didn't tell them initially because they didn't feel like they would understand. Right. And so it's so important.
Give people courage when you tell your story.
Absolutely. And so that cultural competency piece that you're talking about, it should be a part of just teachers' development. Mm-hmm. Before you get in that classroom, let's just talk about what could be in your classroom. Particularly if you're teaching in Southeast Washington or Brownsville or South side of Chicago. Let's just talk about what could potentially be in that classroom. I went to see my father over the weekend, so on Monday when I come in, I'm a little, quiet. I'm more quiet. I'm not as, I don't participate as much, or I'm withdrawn. You got to think about that. That's why he dealing with what happened on the visit. He missed his parent. It's all kinds of things. Or people shooting in your neighborhood, or your mother. You got to wake up. You got to drop your little brother off and your little sister off before you get to school, and you ain't got no pencil.
Or I'm hungry.
There you go. Or I'm sleepy because I've been up all night.
Right. Why don't more people in DC turn to politics?
I think we do. I think I'm gonna tell you.
Like being a kid in the street and being like, I want to be a politician.
Yeah, I think we got a few guys who've done that.
I feel like people in DC do that more than they do in
other cities. I think because historically we've had a black government, right? And I think we got people like Robert White, Trayon White, Kenya McDuffie, guys that are from the community that are council members. Our Mayor Bowser, she's from Washington. But I think now on the national level, though, we don't have a play on the national scene. Our amazing delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton has been there forever. She's amazing, but she's not a voting member. She's like a person from Guam or Puerto Rico. So on a national level, I don't think a lot of people from DC is as interested in going on the Hill. And then also when you local DC for the world, like we really don't, the Hill is just as much yours as it is ours. We really don't see the Hill as being a part of DC. The White House, all that's not DC for the person that's born there. I told you guys I lived in the biggest open-air drug market in the city, and from our corner you can see the dome of the Capitol. Like I mean, there's another example. Google has an office that I didn't know existed 6 blocks from my house now, right? Push it took me to. It was a screening for Matthew Cook's Survivors. Oh man, I'm messing the title up. Survivors, something about incarceration is a brilliant film. Survivor's Guide to Prison, and Push come pick me up. I was like, yo, the Google joint, I didn't realize, but it's right across the street from the Capitol though, right? Mm-hmm. So just to give you context of how close the Capitol is to our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? My beautiful gentrified neighborhood.
How do we make prisons actual correctional facilities? Like I want to put the prisoner education back in and make the degrees mean something when they come home. Like we need to really be trying to reform people while they're there.
We got to reimagine how we look at it. We got to first see people, as human beings, as mothers and fathers, sisters and daughters. We have to provide training. Don't have people just making furniture and something that they can't use when they come home. Right. When I was out in the Chan Zuckerberg Institute, which is Mark Zuckerberg's and his wife's philanthropic foundation. I was out there Monday, and I met a guy named Ali who was in San Quentin. He did like 12 years in San Quentin. He learned how to code. Now he works at CZI. We got to do that.
Yes. And you know what? Biggs was up here the other day, and he was talking about 2 films he produced for the Tribeca Film Festival. And the different thing about this was they actually had the inmates working on making the movies. So they acted in them, worked on making the actual movies. They were behind the scenes and all of that. So for them, and they all made statements, it was a great experience for them, doing something they never thought they would be able to do, working with the director, working with the producer, and not just being filmed like they are on lockup, but actually being involved in the production and the whole behind the scenes of it.
But like you said, we got to do more things that are more cutting edge.
You got to teach them trades.
Something that they like can use, marketable skills, man.
Somebody could be a millionaire off of that.
Absolutely.
And teach other
and we have a lack of
that we don't
right now.
do.
We need more people that know how to code.
So why not, as a capture audience, people, these guys are brilliant though.
Absolutely.
That's the other thing. They can learn anything, bro. They can learn anything. These guys that's in prison, when given the right opportunity, because many of them, had they had the right support and love, they wouldn't even be there.
Right.
And you got a group of inmates who, guys who, they just gonna do what they're gonna do, right? But for the majority, in my experience, no matter what the offense is, that I believe in redemption, man. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you give people the opportunity to do it, that's why I mentioned that hiring policy piece as well, though, right? Because you can teach them whatever they want, but when they come home, if they can't get the job, so we need a 2-pronged approach as well. The business community, we gotta change. Like I'm not saying that, I always use this example that a bank robber can work at Bank of America, right? We get that. Mm-hmm. We're not asking that, but it's some things, man, that we gotta reimagine how we do. You can't wear this scarlet letter for the rest of your life, man.
But it was they systemically took out prison education in '94 because if you got private prisons, you want to keep that cycle going. I don't want you to get rehabilitated. I want you to go out and make another mistake so you can come back and give me some more time.
I mean, even not to mention the contracts that said that these beds had to be filled up to like 90%. So then that's going to impact how I police as well. I think about that, like that term hyper-policing. It was police in my neighborhood. It's police in my neighborhood. I'm 37. All my life, they was jumping out on us, searching us at 11 and 12 years old, bro. Like that became just literally a part of just the day. Let them do what they do. This is what we used to say. Let them do what they do so they can go ahead, right? Like that's just how it go. We talking about crap gang robberies and all these things so when you start talking about the relationship, the police were set forth to do this. This is what happens in these communities. And I think DC is very important in that, in terms of this conversation of law enforcement in general, where we had the blackest police force. We had black judges and black prosecutors, black mayors, black police chiefs, and we still the number one incarcerated. We got the highest incarceration rate. You know what I'm saying? Back then when I was coming up, it's the same way. So it's about the system, is what I'm saying, right? It's not always just about if we got more black people. We got to reimagine what the whole role of the system is, and we have to want everybody to get to the top. The question becomes, is that what we want? Like to your point, is that what we want in this country?
Of course not. Not when I got a private prison. That's an easy investment.
That's right. But even if I got a state or federal prison, those prisons provide opportunities for other people. So, it's a lot, man. You even look at it, I was just thinking about what inmates go through. You got 7 dudes got killed in South Carolina, and prison riots and all this stuff with
it's inhumane
conditions. When Hurricane Harvey happened in Houston, you know what I mean? Like I mentioned how DC guys all in the Fed. So it was about 41 DC guys in Beaumont, USP Beaumont, and just the fact they left those men. I don't know how many inmates that's in there in total. That left those men in a prison for 14 days. They didn't have like running water and all that stuff. You just thinking about that though. No running water, no phone, all this stuff. Men, right, on top of each other, and some in 3-man cells and 2-man cells and all that. Violence can occur is what I'm saying when these conditions, you know what I mean? So a lot, but people that aren't, if that's not your brother, father, cousin, aunt, uncle, sister in that, you don't care as much.
It doesn't affect you.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. Yeah.
Well, we
tell
appreciate
them about the book, man. Slug.
Yeah, Slug, A Boy's Life in the Age of Mass Incarceration. Please go get it. It's on Amazon. The most comprehensive look at mass incarceration and its impacts in our community. And I want to thank you guys for having me.
Thanks for stopping through. Tony Lewis Jr.
Oh, tell them where to find you on social media too.
Oh yeah, Mr. Tony Lewis Jr. IG, Twitter, Tony Lewis on Facebook. DC or nothing.
All right, it's Tony Lewis Jr. It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.